Yeah, so I'm Talon Pascal. Right now we are on the unceded territory of the Litwaat Nation, which is also part of the larger St'át'imc Nation. The Litwaat Nation is one of the biggest nations in BC, and it goes all the way from Whistler all the way up towards Mount Meager, up the Pemberton Valley, and then down Lillooet Lake towards Port Douglas there.
Can you talk about the significance of bow making and archery within the Lil'wat community, either now or historically?
Well, historically, the bow and arrow was something that was always very important, not only to Litwaat people, but to people all over the North American and South American continent. For us and obviously other people, it was our lifeline. It was bow making and arrow making and flint knapping was just a necessity for. Traditionally, it was men and boys who did all the bow making and hunting, so it was just a necessity for them. Fathers would teach their sons at a young age how to make their own bows, how to make their own arrows. Young kids, anywhere from the ages of 6 to 10, would be practicing on little birds, hunting on little birds, and then as they got older, they would start shooting at dragonflies and grass stems. It just bow making itself is not only a sacred thing, it's just part of what people had to do back in the day. Like I said before, it was just a necessity. If you didn't know how to make a bow, then you couldn't hunt. If you knew how to make a bow but not a good bow, you still wouldn't be able to hunt properly. And one of the things I was always told was a good hunter would have lots of wives, and a bad hunter wouldn't have any wives at all. So basically it was the better bow you made, the more wives you would have. The sinew-back bow is arguably one of the most high-performing and effective bows that were made by native peoples. It wasn't only made here in British Columbia, it was made across North America. You get down in the prairies, they had the short buffalo sinew-back bows, and then you go all the way down to California, they had sinew-back bows. And the reason why wherever they could sinew-back bows, they would sinew-back bows, was because it was just how effective it was. And one of the things with sinew-back bow is, with the self bow, something you might notice is the bow is bent in the same direction that it's going to be shot. So I'd be shooting it this way, but it's bent towards me, which is usually what you don't want. Bow makers call that set. So set is just when the bow is bent the same direction as when it's going to be shot. And with the sinew-backed bow, what we do is we actually string the bow backwards while we apply the sinew on, so that when the sinew dries, it either keeps that backwards bend or it stays completely straight. And the reason why that makes the bow so much more effective is when you string a bow and you shoot it, the bow is going to want to go back to this relaxed position, the straight position, or the backward bent position. So as you're drawing the bow back and shooting it, the bows obviously want to go back to that position, but the string's there to stop it. So it's offering more energy and more power to the arrow. The thing with a lot of indigenous archery is a lot of their bows were super short, so they weren't drawing their bows back super far. Like what I was saying, this was the draw point marker. We weren't drawing right to the end of the arrow. My personal draw is anywhere from 22 inches to 24 inches, which is pretty short. Like you get the English longbow hunters or the compound bow hunters that are pulling 30 inches long. So with the longer draw, the thing with the longer draw is you actually get more speed because you're getting more of a power stroke. But with the shorter draw, you don't have as much speed. You still can get really fast arrow speeds, but just not as fast. So the way we compensated for that was we made lighter arrows so that just to get more arrow speed. That's why with a lot of the historical arrows that you find in the archaeological record here in North America, they're super small. Like these two arrowheads here are more closer to what the size you would find in the archaeological record, and just like you can fit them on the tip of your finger.
Can you talk about the materials used to make them, the bow and the arrows?
So traditionally here in Lil'wat, where the climate's a lot more damp, it's more of a coastal climate than when you go up to, say, Lillooet, where it gets a lot drier. Here we used a lot more of the Pacific yew wood. We also used a lot of dogwood and Rocky Mountain maple and vine maple, which are all three of those are really common here. So yeah, this is a piece of yew wood. It's a yew wood self bow, and a self bow is a bow that's just made out of wood. There's nothing added to it. It's just a single piece of wood. Unlike a bow like this, which has a sinew, deer sinew glued to the back of it. This would be called a composite bow. And a composite bow is a bow that's made out of a composite of material, so it's made out of more than one material. So these two bows here, or these two type of bows, are really common around here. The self bow is a little bit more common, especially here in the Lil'wat territory, since it's a lot more damp. The thing with sinew is it's basically water activated, moisture activated, so if it was to get wet in the rain, then it'll delaminate, it'll start peeling off the back of the bow. So with most of my sinew bows that I make, I usually finish them off with a coating of modern wood finish, just so that I don't have to be scared of getting them wet or anything. A lot of my bows will have just the modern nylon string because you can get a lot better or more higher performance from them because they're so much lighter and they have less stress, or stretch I mean. With this bow I actually made a deer sinew string, which is what we would traditionally use, which is this stuff. This is what it would have looked like before when I dried it. And then I would pound it with another smooth rock to tease all the fibers out, and I'm basically just peeling these separate fibers out.
Right. A little similar to jerky.
Yeah. And the sinew is, well, the sinew is like the Achilles tendon. The Achilles tendon is sinew. So usually with the deer, we're getting the sinew from the leg or from the back, which is where these came from. It's the back sinew is the longest sinew, which is usually what you use to make string because it's really long. And I twisted it up and I soaked it in water because I twisted it up dry like this. And then after I twisted it up, I soaked it in water so that it would shrink and then it wouldn't fall apart. And they make fine strings, they work, they just don't work as good as this stuff because these stretch a lot. Most of my arrows would be made out of service berry, or most people around here probably know it as Saskatoon berry. In our language we call it chocum. Other traditional woods that we use for our arrows would be birch or cedar. Those would be called split timber arrows because basically what we're doing is we're taking the trunk of a tree and we're cutting it down and then we're splitting sections out of it, and we're taking these little splinters and then we're carving them and rounding them out to make these arrows. This is a cedar arrow.
Light.
Yeah.
Really light.
Yeah. What I do is after I cut the shoots is I scrape all the bark off, and then I'll leave them in a nice cool area where there's not in direct sunlight to let them completely dry. So that's usually anywhere from a month to 2 months. After they're dry, what we usually do is we build a fire and we heat the area that we want to straighten over the fire.
Traditional way of kind of bending it.
And then we would straighten it out.
Very cool.
Another thing that Lil'wat hunters would traditionally do is, I don't really do them with my arrows because I haven't found the need to do them, but what they would often do is they would actually chew the arrows or the outside of the arrow shaft so that it breaks the grain of the wood so that it doesn't warp as easy. Something we see a lot in a lot of the West Coast arrows is the thing with hunting on the ground versus hunting on horseback. Like if you go down to the prairies like the Lakota people, what you might find is a lot of their bows and arrows are really short because they're hunting off a horseback. So obviously when they're galloping on a horse toward a buffalo, you're getting real up and close and personal, so you're not having to be as accurate. The rule of thumb is the longer your arrow is, the more easily accurate you can be. So a lot of the coastal people had a lot longer arrows than that of the prairies.
Throughout this conversation, you've shared comments about what traditional Lil'wat hunters would be doing and crafting. Where did you gain some of this information? Is there a community you speak to, or is there an elder that you're working with one-on-one?
Most of the information that I got for my bows and arrows came from an old ethnographical account that a late 18th, early 19th century ethnographer had written and documented. His name was James Tate, and he had went all over St'át'imc territory documenting
Wow.
everything about, basically everyday life of the St'át'imc people, and it was everything from basket making to household items to
The entire St'át'imc area.
yeah.
All the way up.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, so anywhere from basket making to pit house building, canoe making, clothing, jewelry, tattoos, and bow making and arrow making.
And how would you hope, this information, this historical information that you've discovered and then, made into a physical form again gets passed on or move forward? What would your hope be?
Well, my hope is that more people would take an interest to this stuff. Unfortunately, there's very little people in Lil'wat that know how to do this stuff or who want to do this stuff. In the whole of the St'át'imc Nation, there's still very little. I know very little people, and I definitely think that more Indigenous people need to take an interest or step up to do this kind of stuff. And obviously, the reason why I'm doing this now is to pass it on. Before, like I was saying, I was just curious on
Right.
wanting to do this. So before, I wasn't planning to
Right.
teach or anything like that. But now, since I've know how to do this stuff, and I wouldn't say I mastered it, but I have gotten really good at it to where I can teach people.
Right.
Because even now, I'm still learning things and getting better at things.
Well, thank you very much for the time and talking about the archery today,
Yeah.
Talon.
Yeah.
We really, really appreciate it.